Good Rum show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, now don't let it be said that I don't listen to you guys, the viewers. I can't remember the person that put a comment on one of the videos from a couple of weeks ago saying, can you do an episode of the show on El Dorado rum? Yep, no problem, wearing your Opeth t-shirt. Why, I don't know, but here I am. I'm doing an episode of the show on El Dorado rum, wearing my Opeth t-shirt. So why rum again? Well, because I like rum, and as I probably mentioned when I did the Kill Devil range some couple of months ago or whenever it was, the wonderful thing about rum is that sort of obviously not only do the producers have different base materials to work from. You have obviously sugarcane, whether it's sugarcane juice or honey, molasses, as it is in this particular case with the El Dorado range. Not only do they have these base materials, they obviously have the different types of still they can use, and this all makes for, you know, a completely interesting array of different weights of spirit to sort of play with. Now, a lot of distilleries, both whiskey distilleries and rum distilleries, will have a range of age statement whiskies and or spirits, I should say, and they often tend to be pretty much the same blend, just a different point in its evolution, which is great from obviously when you're doing a sort of a vertical tasting, because you're obviously tasting the same spirit, just a, you know, generally speaking, a different age statement, so you can kind of chart the progress. But obviously rum distillers are slightly different, and certainly they do things slightly differently at the Diamond Distillery in Guyana, which is where El Dorado is produced. Not only do they have a huge array of different stills, which I will obviously get onto in a minute, but they basically tailor each of their rum age statement rums pretty much to, you know, a different specification, different stills, and so it's not a case of, well, the 3-year-old is just a 3-year-old version of the 8-year-old or the 21-year-old or whatever. Each individual age statement bottling is completely unique in its own way, and this is one of the wonderful things that I think categorises of rum distilleries, is the fact that they can do this thing, you know. Like I said, the Diamond Distillery is probably one of the most unique distilleries. I mean, it was founded in 1650 or thereabouts, when the British brought the art of distillation to Guyana. Now, what you have to remember with rum is that it's kind of like not an afterthought, but essentially what you had is sugar plantations. They're producing, obviously, the raw material to be refined into granulated sugar, and you'd end up with this gloopy mess, you know, this molasses. What do you do with it? And when you think about it, it's just a byproduct, you know. So it's actually quite a green industry, for want of a better words, because it's using this sort of unwanted gloopy mess and making something out of it. And this trend continued, and practically every sugar plantation at one point or another had a distillery attached to it. Obviously over time these plantations have disappeared or been amalgamated, and the same with distilleries. They've closed down. And what you have here with the Diamond Distillery is essentially two distilleries, the old distillery and the newer, more modern distillery. And the old distillery is essentially a collection of these stills from other distilleries that have closed down. And again, another interesting thing about the rum industry is that it's keyed to the actual still itself. So for argument's sake, the distillery owns several wooden Kofi stills, including a double wooden pot still, which was originally at the Port Morant distillery. That closed down and it got shipped over to to the Diamond Distillery. They also own a single wooden pot still, which was originally at the Versailles Distillery before moving to Enmore, then Iflut, and then finally ending up at Diamond. So it's kind of like, I suppose, I mean, this happens in the Scotch whisky industry. You know, a distillery will close down, another distillery will probably buy the still from that distillery, but they don't tend to sort of say it was distilled on the X Inverleven still, for argument's sake. It's that the whisky is kind of is keyed to the distillery itself rather than keyed to the individual still. I mean, you might get occasional bottlings by distilleries that said this has been distilled on a particular type of still, but by and large this whole idea of the spirit being keyed to the actual still itself is quite unique to the rum industry. And so what you have is, in the old part of the Diamond Distillery, I believe 10 different stills. I mean, 10, you know, so they've got obviously the two wooden stills. They've got the wooden single pot still from Versailles, the double pot still from the Port Morant Distillery. They've also got the only, as far as I'm aware, wooden Kofi still in existence, which was originally at the Enmore Distillery. And if you see pictures of it, it looks like sort of, you know, a giant piece of Meccano, kind of, you know, bits of wood bolted together. And this is another sort of mind-blowing thing about the distillery, is that, you know, wooden stills, you wouldn't have thought that they would have worked. You would have thought the wood would have dried out. And yes, they have to keep the stills moist by cascading water down the side, and it is made from, you know, a particular type of wood that doesn't mind getting wet. I believe it's sort of it's local wood to Guyana itself. But even so, you sort of like, you look at these stills and they are really, really ancient, and they've been patched up and they're still working really well. And when you think about it, why shouldn't wood work well as a still? I mean, essentially, when you're aging the spirit in a wooden cask, the wood is obviously taking away a lot of the sulfur compounds and things like that. So it just goes to show that it would do exactly the same when used as a still, although the necks, if you've seen the pictures of them, are obviously made from copper. So they have these stills. They also have a double column copper Kofi still, so another different type of still. And then they have two 4-column Saville French stills, which were originally at the Iflut distillery, or estate, for want of a better word. So again, you've got all this different combination of stills, but like I said, that's not only the stills they have. They also have a John Doerr high ester copper column still. Now, I don't think that I think that gets used for more experimental spirits. It's basically, as the name suggests, it's a high ester still. It produces a spirit with a lot more fruity esters than the standard column still. And then they have a still, I don't know because I haven't found a picture of it, called the Tri-Canada column still, which I believe they use for making vodka. So I don't know how many columns it actually has. It's probably one giant bloody column, I imagine. So that's the old part of the distillery, and it's pretty much like a shack, for want of a better words, just rammed full of all these ancient stills. You know, it's not exactly pretty on the eye, shall we say, but it's kind of, it does the job. It's pretty much, you know, very much a commercial entity, you know. And then in the new part of the still, they have new part of the distillery, they have state-of-the-art high-capacity 5-column still, which I believe they use for making bulk spirit, and a Kofi still. I don't know how many columns that has. I'd guess at probably about 2. So what you have is the old part of the distillery, which is making sort of rums for their kind of core ranges, and you've got the newer part, which is basically making the bulk spirit to sell off to other companies to bottle under their own label. So So here you go. So basically, we have, you know, all these different stills they can play around with. Obviously, as you know, with column stills, you can change the rectifying plates in them to create sort of heavier or lighter spirits. Obviously, the pot stills are going to give you a weighty kind of heavy characterized spirit. And we haven't even talked about the oak yet. I mean, you know, we're just talking about the actual distillation of the spirit, but not only do they have all this to play with, but everything is aged in refilled bourbon casks, which are stripped and recoopered to their specifications, and then no barrel is used more than 5 times, and then after it's spent 10 years in the cask, it's then re-racked into a new barrel. So, I mean, the amount of work involved in the production of rum at this distillery is mind-blowing. I mean, you know, this is to talk about sort of like taking things to the nth degree. So this, I think, is going to be a really, really interesting tasting. Like I said, this is not going to be a case of, oh, well, this is what the 3-year-old's like, and it's just different age, same spirit. These are all different individually blended spirits, and should hopefully from this tasting show the, you know, remarkable versatility of this particular distillery. So I think this is going to be a really interesting tasting. So anyway, there's a fair amount of information about the Diamond Distillery online. So, you know, if you want to sort of look into it in greater depth, then certainly it's out there. But I think it's time to get on and introduce the lineup and taste some rum, I think. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with their white rum. It's 3 years old, bottled at 40%, and obviously, like the white rum produced by Diplomatico, for example, it's aged, but it has no colour. So obviously, this is twice charcoal filtered. Now, I don't know what the still combination is for this particular rum, but I'm guessing it's probably going to be the copper column still, and it's going to be fairly simplistic. It's, you know, your classic kind of blending rum. So there's where we're going to kick off. Next one we're going to look at is the 5-year-old. Now this is where the range starts to get interesting with regards to the different types of stills that are used. So this is a 5-year-old spirit. It's bottled at 40%, and the spirit comes from the Eiflet Saville 4-column still and the Enmore wooden Kofi still. So here we've got, obviously, the combination of basically pot and column still, and so hopefully we should get that kind of blending of characteristics. The next bottling we'll be looking at is the 8-year-old, again bottled at 40%. This is a blend of spirits taken from 4 different stills, 2 of which are again the Enmore wooden Kofi and the Port Morant double pot still. I don't know what the other 2 are. The information doesn't seem to be on their website, but I would guess it's probably going to be probably again the Kofi still, and maybe the 2 of the Kofi stills or something like that. So that is the 8-year-old. Then we're going to move on to the 12-year-old, again bottled at 40%. This is a blend of spirits taken from 3 different stills. We've got the Enmore wooden Kofi still, one of the Diamond Distillery's Kofi metal copper column stills, and the Port Morant double wooden pot still. So it seems like that the backbone of the blends so far is the Port Morant double wooden pot still. So obviously that is what kind of like it sets the tone for the style, and then obviously by adding in the spirits from the different other stills will give it the nuance. And then finally we've been looking at the 15-year-old. Now this is bottled at 43%. And is a blend of spirits from, again, the Enmore wooden Kofi still, the Diamond Kofi still, the Port Morant double wooden pot still, and the single Versailles wooden pot still. So again, should be rather interesting. I would love to have had the 21-year-old and the 25, but the 25 is ridiculously expensive, and you can see why I didn't get a sample of that. And unfortunately, not the 21, but I mean the 21 is pretty impressive anyway. But I think this should give us sort of like, you know, an interesting tasting, nevertheless. So guess we'll kick off with the 3-year-old then. Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Quite high toned, certainly it has that sort of fresh column still character to it. There's a little bit of dried fruit, there's a little bit of wood spice, and a touch of vanilla. It's very rounded, it's very much like the Diplomatico white, although I think from memory the Diplomatico does seem to have a little bit more vanilla character than this does. So this is not quite, I guess if you've got, say, Diplomatico at one end and, say for argument's sake, the Trois Rivieres white at the other end as the sort of completely natural, straight off the still style of white rum, this is obviously sitting somewhere in the middle. It's got obviously the elements of coming straight off the still, with a little roundness added by the oak. So yeah, I mean it's not particularly complex. You wouldn't expect it to be. It's pleasant, and it's got some nice character to it. So let's see what the palate gives us. Possibly a little bit more character on the palate. There's a little bit more of the creaminess from the oak. There's a little bit more dried fruit. Again, it's got that high tone sort of column still spice note. It's got some nice length. There's a little bit of tropical fruit, a little bit of dried banana kind of coming through on the aftertaste. Little bit of toffee possibly. Yeah, I mean, it's not sort of majorly complex, but it's certainly, you know, a pleasant spirit. You know, it's obviously been designed, being the wrong word, but put together primarily to be used as a mixer or a cocktail ingredient. And it's got enough character, I think, to sort of stand up to being bashed around with by other things. But yeah, so it's not a bad starter. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 5-year-old. So this is all column still, distilled spirit, obviously some from the wooden Kofi. So let's see what the nose gives us. Similar to the 3-year-old, it certainly has that high-toned, slightly spicy column still character. There's a bit of dried fruit. It's obviously got a little bit more weight. There's a touch more kind of coffee notes kind of coming through from the oak. But I mean, again, it's relatively straightforward. It's pleasant. In my experience, it often tends to be the case that that rums that are under around about 8 years old don't quite have the complexity. I mean, there are one or two exceptions to that. But generally speaking, they're kind of, you know, ideal for mixing with things rather than something you'd probably want to categorise as a sipping rum, I suppose. But anyway, I mean, this has got some slightly more weight to it, a little bit more wood spice. But again, it's soft, it's polished, very column still characterised, and yeah, it's nice. It's a nice nose. It's easy going. So let's see what the palate gives us. Yeah, that's nicely balanced. I mean, it doesn't have that kind of pot still weight to it. It's got that, obviously, that lightness, elegance. There's plenty of that sort of coffeed oak character there, a little bit of dark chocolate, some pleasant dried fruits, sort of slightly sort of dried grapey kind of sultana, the lighter types of rather than the more sort of raisinated dried fruits. Again, elegant, medium length. I mean, it's got a little bit of like I said, coffee, a little bit of spice on the finish. Pleasant, nice rum, well balanced. Like I said, maybe not the most sort of complex of spirit, but certainly certainly a pleasant rum. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 8-year-old. So main components from this coming from the Enmore Kofi, wooden Kofi, and the Port Morant double wooden pot still. So what I'm assuming we're going to get here is now the kind of progression onwards. We will now get the sort of the weight from the pot still, and this will kind of like set the tone, so to speak. So, and it does. This to me is very much more Guyana-y. I often find Guyana-y spirits or Guyana rum to be quite sort of pungent, quite oily, full of impurities, for want of a better word, which are obviously not taken out by which are what necessarily. What I'm trying to basically say is I'm guessing that the copper stills would be a little bit more efficient at removing those impurities rather than the wooden stills, which is what gives it its character. I mean, I love Guyanan rum, and like I said, this has got that light oiliness, it's got pungency. There's some lovely Demerara sugar notes, some darker dried fruits, some lovely weight, but also you're getting that sort of slightly higher toned dried fruit from the column still. Lovely spices, almost a sort of slight violet-y note kind of coming through. Yeah, and for a young spirit, I mean, this what retails about 30, 31, 32. This is a lovely rum. This is absolutely fantastic. This just goes to show how the different types of spirit from the different stills are just blended together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And it's a lovely note, some slightly dark honey notes kind of coming through now. But like I said, all the while you've got that sort of the weight, but you've got the elegance of the column still spirit, really nicely balanced. Let's see what the palate gives us. Oh, that's got a lovely progression. Kicks off with that weighty molasses, heavy pot still, dried fruits, and then you start to get the column still notes kind of coming through, the slightly higher toned, lighter dried fruit character. There's a little bit of wood spice, a little bit of honey, a bit of some lovely rich sweetness from the molasses, but the crispness of the column still kind of balances that up. And again, this is another wonderful thing about the use of pot stills and column stills. So the column still gives you that lighter, crisper, fresher style of spirit, which balances up against the sweetness of the molasses that's basically used. And again, obviously this is not sweetened post distillation like Diplomatico, so you can see in that spirit the two different types of still kind of working to balance each other out. So I think that is fantastic. I think that is great value for money, and I think if you're looking for a pure, lovely sipping rum, you can't go too much far wrong with that particular one as far as I'm concerned. So really good, very, very good. Okay, so let's move on to the 12-year-old. Let's see what the notes gives us on this then, shall we? Similar-ish to the 8-year-old. It's, again, you've got the weight of the sort of the heavier pot still character spirit. There's a little bit more maturity to it. There's obviously more oxidization notes. There's a little bit more sort of maturity in the oak spirit, the oak character. There's some lovely spiciness. There's some gingery notes. There's some dark chocolate. Even a little bit of sort of violetiness, which I often kind of pick up in rum. Again, it's just really amazingly balanced. There's smokiness here, which I'm guessing is kind of predominantly going to be coming from the charred oak, because obviously we've not discovered the smokiness within the spirit of the previous bottling. So just a lovely depth to it. Again, really elegant, polished, rounded, but it has that sort of pungency of Guyanan rum, although not as pungent as some Guyanan rums I've tasted. In actual fact, I was tasting I think it was a 12-year-old actually. Yeah, I think it was a 12-year-old single cask diamond rum bottled by an independent bottling company, and that was just reeking of pungent, Guyanan character. This is a lot more polished, but there's certainly that kind of, pungency to the spirit. A little bit of almost kind of burnt toast kind of coming through now. Again, that lovely sort of scented, high-toned dried fruits from the column still. Oh, lovely. Really, really nice nose. And again, this is what, 40s, Again, really, really good value for money. Let's see what the palate gives us. Sweeter, richer, more of that kind of raisinated, dark, honey-coated fruits. The emphasis is definitely more on the pot still character here, although you can feel the column still freshness just nipping at the edges, giving a little bit of higher tone dried fruits, a little bit of spice. There's some lovely wood notes, again a little bit of a smokiness, but the pot still seems to be the kind of focus here on the palate. Big, chunky, weighty, but again, nicely balanced. It's a little bit sweeter, it's quite a bit sweeter than the 8-year-old actually, but I think the balance is still really, really good. It's not kind of like a cloying finish to it, but it's definitely on the sweeter side. So I mean, this is going to, if you love Diplomatico, for example, you love the sweeter styles of rum, this is going to be sort of right up your street, so to speak. So again, really, really nice. Right, and finally we're on to the 15-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Now this has gone completely the other way. Now this on the nose is more emphasis on the Kofi still element. It's elegant, it's delicate, it's more high-toned, really spicy. Dried fruits, again that slight violet-y note, but and that sort of oily pungency, which is quite surprising really from a 15-year-old spirit. You would have thought that kind of length of time in the wood would remove an awful lot of those kind of pungent sort of esters and oils, heavy oils. Really almost whiskey-like in its kind of aroma. There's certainly an orangey sort of citrus note. There's some lovely mature oak. There's some oxidized notes as well. It's really complex. Touch of coffee. Just so elegant. This is an impressive, really impressive spirit, and it's what, 50 odd quid, and again I think really, really good value for money. A touch of sort of charcoal or sort of burnt wood. it's just a fantastic nose. That's a lovely nose. This is the sort of rum that if you're a whiskey drinker, this is where you should start to sort of, if you're going to look into rums, this is the kind of rum that you should be sort of like getting your hands on, because it has that sort of elegance and that sort of whiskey-like kind of character. Palate. Again, the palate is relatively sweet, not as sweet as the 8-year-old. It has a lingering sweetness and a lingering sort of burnt raisins and toasted oak. It's probably more 50-50. It's not mega heavy. I mean, there is the weight of the pot still there, but it's really, really well balanced by the column still character. There's a lovely spiciness. There's the sort of, like I said, the more raisinated, oxidised dried fruits. Touch of slightly marmalade-y kind of orange notes. Some lovely spices. The length is stunning, absolutely fantastic. It just goes on and on and on, and it might not have sort of the kind of progression of, say, the 8-year-old. It does kind of sort of deliver everything almost in one go, and you're going, oh, I'm getting this, I'm getting that, and it doesn't really sort of, progress through the different types of spirits. It kind of, like I said, it kind of delivers it all, and then just kind of mellows and lingers, and you're just going and just fantastic, absolutely stunning, really, really good. I mean, yeah, I would love to have had a sample of the 21-year-old, and the 21-year-old is a huge hike in price, it has to be said. I mean, it's 100 and something, I think, jumping from sort of like 50 odd quid for the 15-year-old up to sort of 90, 100 quid for the 21, but the 15 is just absolutely fantastic. That is really good. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and like I said to you at the beginning of the show, the wonderful thing about the Diamond Distillery is they have access to all these different types of stills. I mean, I would love to taste, and if you're watching, I'd love to taste individual samples from each of the 10 stills that they have, or 9 or 10 stills they have. I would just love that experience to sort of like taste all the individual components and then maybe blend them together. So here's a thought, isn't it? Wouldn't it be a great episode of the show to do an episode of the show from the Diamond Distillery in their blending room with all their samples, So if you're watching and you are from the distillery, there you go, bit of PR for you. No, but basically coming back to this week's episode of the show, the 3-year-old, the white rum, yeah, it's pleasant. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a 3-year-old rum. You're not going to expect fireworks, but it's certainly got enough character. It's straightforward. It's, like I said, predominantly, I would have thought, Kofi still matured distilled spirit, probably the Diamond copper Kofi stills. The 5-year-old, yeah, okay, this is where we're starting to get a bit interesting. Like I said, again, all column stills, so slightly higher tone, fresh, pleasant. Again, it's a mix of rum, but it's got enough kind of interest that if you wanted to sort of like drink that on its own, I think that would certainly be really pleasant. The 8-year-old, now the 8-year-old is where I think the whole range starts to get interesting. It's kind of, like I said, the bedrock being the Port Morant double wooden pot still. It's got the weight, it's got, certainly with the 8-year-old, it's just got phenomenal balance, it's got progression, it's 30 quid, this is a lovely rum. this is what rum is all about, in my opinion. Yeah, all right, okay, the 15, the 21, are stunningly mature rums, but this just kind of almost in essence showcases exactly what you'd want from the different types of spirit, the different types of still, that kind of thing. So I don't think you can go wrong with the 8-year-old. Yes, we are stocking it. The 12-year-old, again, a lovely rum. Probably a little bit more sweeter, like I said, than the 8-year-old. So it's going to be, if you're in that sort of the Diplomatico kind of drinker, you will certainly sort of gravitate probably more to the 12-year-old. Again, pleasant, really nice, again, well balanced. And the 15-year-old, pretty much the same thing, maybe not quite so sweet, maybe not having the progression of the 8-year-old, but certainly you've got the complexity again of the different stills. And it's a wonderful rum, a really very, very good rum. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you'll keep commenting and keep watching. Not quite sure what we're going to be doing, or what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be doing next week, but there's still a few interesting episodes of the show up my sleeve, so to speak. Well, I had sleeves, I suppose. Anyway, so this is this week's episode of the show in the bag. So all that's left to say is good dramming and good afternoon.